Hi friends, it's Anton here again, and you're back on the Blackroom channel. I get asked a lot, how can I get good sound in my home theater without spending a fortune? All those things like good built-in speakers for home theaters, like JBL Synthesis, Bowers & Wilkins, or Procella audio, they're great, of course, and they sound good, but they're pretty expensive. So how do you build a home theater in your living room without breaking the bank? That's what we're talking about today. Let's go. Usually, people think that an affordable, budget home theater is built using various hi-fi components, hi-fi speakers, bookshelf speakers, small floor standers, a receiver, and so on. But today, I suggest we turn this whole topic upside down and look at it from a different angle. And it all started when I recently bought a pair of small studio monitors for working at my computer at home. Before that, I had a pair of hi-fi speakers from an American brand, a good DAC, and a small amplifier. And honestly, I thought everything was fine. But eventually, it was time for a change, and I decided to try out some small, affordable studio monitors. These are the ones I got. They're JBL. They cost only 10,000 rubles each. And I was honestly surprised. And it was after that I got the idea for this video, that in fact, it's much more reasonable, accurate, and probably even cheaper to build a small home theater using studio monitors. So let's break down in this video the main pros and cons of using studio monitors instead of the usual hi-fi speakers in a home theater. So what exactly is a studio monitor? Essentially, it's usually a bookshelf speaker with built-in amplifiers, and it's used to control and monitor the quality of a mix in various recording, mixing, or mastering studios. That's exactly why they're called monitors, studio monitors, because they're used in studios to monitor the audio program that we later hear through various sound sources, whether it's a Bluetooth speaker, your home theater, any other stereo system, or even a soundbar. So let's get right to the main advantages of using studio monitors instead of hi-fi speakers in your home theater. So advantage number 1, built-in amplifier. And usually, there are actually 2 amplifiers, one for each frequency band. Most small studio monitors are typically 2-way. And for each of these bands, the low-frequency section and the high-frequency tweeter, you'll have a dedicated amplifier. And if we're talking about a monitor that's not the cheapest, then usually the crossover between bands is handled in the digital domain. So inside there is exactly this kind of small digital processor, where the crossover between bands happens. That's it. But even if it's an inexpensive active monitor for a perfectly reasonable price, the crossover between bands there won't happen like it does in a regular hi-fi speaker, at the high-level signal stage. That is, at the audio signal coming from the amplifier. And all of this is done in the crossover, which has a lot of coils and capacitors, and then the signal is distributed to the high and low bands. Here, this will happen with a low-level signal, where it's much easier to make a proper filter with fewer distortions at the output. And this principle of channel-by-channel amplification is exactly what allows you to fully unlock the potential of each driver, or each band of your active studio monitor. In other words, they are designed so that the low-frequency woofer and the high-frequency tweeter work as efficiently as possible. They have the necessary power, the right damping factor, and so on and so forth. So they work together, kind of in synergy. They were originally made for each other, so they fit together better and, as a result, deliver the highest quality audio signal with all its nuances. That's exactly what allows studio monitors to play as flat as possible, delivering the flattest possible frequency response. So at home, you also have the opportunity to get this kind of perfectly accurate, flat frequency response sound. This is exactly what will allow you to hear all the nuances of the recording, whereas with regular speakers and an unclear amplifier or preamp, you might lose those nuances because the amplifiers and speakers simply didn't match perfectly, or your passive filters in hi-fi speakers caused phase shifts and cut out certain sounds at specific frequencies. All reference acoustic systems are built on this principle. There are no passive filters, and amplification is done per channel. And even in the automotive industry, when they hold sound quality competitions, usually everyone there uses per channel amplification. That's why almost any studio monitor, especially for comparable money, will be much more accurate, more balanced, and more truthful compared to some hi-fi speakers. And this flat frequency response we just talked about is actually the third advantage of studio monitors. The next advantage is the ability to adjust that very frequency response to suit your room. For example, if you have too many absorbing materials and your high frequencies die out very quickly, you can add a bit of high frequency simply by flipping a dip switch on the back panel of the studio monitor. Or maybe your situation is that you have to place the speaker as close to the wall as possible, simply because you have no way to move it further away. Yeah, for example, you have a TV mounted on the wall, and you hang bookshelf speakers right next to it. That's a pretty normal, common situation in a home living room. And in this case, with a studio monitor, you can leave it near the wall and simply use another switch on the back panel of your studio monitor's amplifier to adjust for the boundary effect. So those peaks in the low frequencies that can appear because the speaker is placed near the wall, you can adjust them right on the speaker itself, without having to use any features of your receiver or tone processor. This allows you to get non-boomer bass in almost any room, even where you previously couldn't do it because you had hi-fi speakers that were passive, and all you could rely on was the equalization options in your receiver. But here, you can make the sound more balanced right from the start, just by flipping a switch or two. And the last advantage, which is probably the most interesting, is the price. The price is much more reasonable than if you were to buy a separate set of hi-fi speakers, pick out an amplifier for them, and so on and so forth. This happens because, in the professional world, people are also making money from this. Basically, it's a tool for mixing tracks, for having the most precise control over what you're doing with the sound in your studio. And with studio monitors, you're usually paying specifically for the result, that is, for the sound quality they deliver. A much smaller portion of the money goes toward things like finishing, distribution, dealer networks, advertising, and so on. Here, most of the money really goes into the sound itself. Of course, even in this field, there's such a thing as paying extra for the brand. However, the impact of this factor on the final price is much less than in the hi-fi or high-end market. But not everything is so perfect and great. There are also downsides. Let's talk about those now. The first drawback is that you'll have to run power to each studio monitor, since each one has its own built-in amplifier, or even two. This means that on both the rear and front walls, you'll need at least 5 extra outlets to hook up a 5.1 system. The second downside, which I've noticed from my own experience, is that inexpensive monitors can produce background noise even when there's no signal going through them and nothing is plugged in. This problem definitely doesn't exist with more expensive studio monitors, but with budget options, there's always that risk. This thing can be annoying, but if you're sitting at least a meter away from the speaker, I don't think you'll hear anything. The next downside is their form factor. They don't come in flat, built-in, or any other installation-friendly designs. That's exactly why we usually don't use them in serious home theater projects. They're pretty big. Even small, inexpensive studio monitors have a rather substantial depth, and you still need to mount them somehow and connect a couple of plugs to the back. So they take up quite a lot of space. Moreover, even if you have that much extra space and you're ready to build this studio monitor into your wall so it's flush with the new wall, you'll still need some space behind it for ventilation and to cool the amplifier that's built into the studio monitor. And in fact, this is a real and significant drawback when it comes to using studio monitors in serious home theaters. Not only will it steal a whole lot of usable space that could otherwise be used for the theater itself, valuable space and volume for sound. On top of that, you also run a real risk of these speakers breaking down if, God forbid, you enclose them in a confined space. I strongly advise against doing that. Now let's move on to the next drawback, number 5. This one is about non-standard professional connectors for hooking up the audio system. When you buy a studio monitor for home use, you need to remember what it was originally designed for, namely, for work in a studio. And in a studio, it's typically set up and connected to other professional equipment, usually either with an XLR connector, which is a balanced connection, or with a TRS jack, which is also basically a balanced connection, a 3-pin jack. Usually, these types of connectors are found in full-fledged audio-video processors for home theaters and cinema halls. But let's be honest, most home theaters around the world are built around audio-video receivers that have speaker outputs from amplifiers. And if you're lucky, they have an analog output from the preamp, but it's not balanced. This is an RCA output. And if you try to connect your studio monitors this way, just using 2 RCA connectors, it won't work. You either need a special adapter or a specially soldered cable. And even then, you'll lose about -6 decibels from the original signal, because studio monitors are designed specifically for balanced connections. Some people might be put off by this loss, while others might actually be happy about it. But it's something you definitely need to know when you're planning a home theater setup with studio monitors. To sum up this video, I want to say the following. Looking into this idea of a home theater with studio monitors, I actually really liked it. And people really do often ask me how to set up a decent home theater, say, for around $500,000. And in the next video, we'll dive into exactly that topic. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you have any questions or comments about studio monitors that I didn't cover, maybe there are some real additional pros or cons, be sure to write about it in the comments. Let's discuss this topic together. Well, this was Anton, founder of Blackroom. And if you want to build a real home theater, you know where to turn. Just follow the links in the description to our website. See you in the next videos. Bye.